Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to 50 by 50, Whatever Happened to the Harvard Class of 1976. I'm a member of that class, Michael Conniff. I'll be your host for the next hour or so, and I am joined by my good friend, Andy Gellis. Hey, Andy, great to see you, and thank you for doing this. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, so many ways to introduce you, but we came to know each other at Harvard as lacrosse players. You were a much better player than I. You were a varsity lacrosse player, I think for 3 years, right? You had a whole career.
It was.
And coming from Long Island, that was not entirely surprising, if I have that right. And then we actually reconnected at, I think it was might have been the 25th reunion. You were at Sony or had just left Sony in charge of IMAX, and we'll get into that for sure. And we did a little bit of collaboration, but I guess my first question to you would be, like, I really think of you so much in the context of Hollywood. I'm kind of curious, does a Harvard education prepare you for Hollywood?
Well, it certainly wasn't in my thinking, either coming out of high school or all through college.
Is that right?
Yeah, I came to the media. Well, it was really the media world after working in the 1976 mass primary, and I worked in the Birch Bayh campaign, who was the senator from Indiana.
So did I.
Field. Yeah, yeah.
Are you kidding me? We're the only two people in the world, other than Joel Feldman, I think, Bobby Gordon, from our class. Yeah, I was in the Bayh campaign in Quincy, Mass. That's where I was put. What did you do?
Field work, sort of grassroots stuff. Was out there. But the real event was going to the polls the day of voting, and I remember it was raining, and it was a low turnout. And I stood there doing sort of exit interviews from people coming out of the polling place, somewhere in Cambridge or thereabouts, Somerville, I don't know. And 9 out of 10 people came out and said they'd voted for Scoop Jackson.
Yeah.
Henry Jackson from Michigan. And why did they vote for him? Because they really loved his television commercial. And the irony of that, of course, was that the guy had come into the Massachusetts primary 2 weeks before voting and had dropped an unheard of sum of $250,000 on television advertising. And he won in a landslide, the mass primary. It was pretty astounding.
I had forgotten that. I remember that Mo Udall did pretty well, and Birch Bayh dropped out of the race. I think he got 5% in that, which was a death knell for him.
Oh, it was totally. And I thought to myself, gee, here I am, a major in government, and thinking I'm going into politics or the State Department or to get a law degree. And gee whiz, boy, could you affect change through media much quicker than you could through government.
And that's when you learned.
Yeah, change of direction.
Wow.
So at that point, I decided that I was going to try to get into television somehow and some way. That ultimately evolved into wanting to program television. And I came to New York City, 1976 graduate, and they had huge layoffs in television that summer. And there were no jobs. I could have gotten a job as an NBC page. That was in the offing.
That would have been the worst thing, Andy.
Yeah,
that would have been the worst thing. A lot of people did that, and I actually, when I became the first new media employee ever hired by NBC in 1981, we were on the mezzanine with all the pages. So I used to watch pages walk by in the blue coats all day long. But you didn't.
It was an entry-level position, but it was way down the totem pole.
yeah, it was truly entry level. So what did you do instead?
I was told in my interviews that the best thing I could do would be to get out into the hinterlands, go to a small television station and get some background, learn what television was about. It was kind of not really what I was interested in doing, only because I had delusions of grandeur being a Harvard grad in 1976. I thought, what's the fastest way to the top of the heap? you know. So I ended up going to California and going to live with my brother in Santa Cruz. I worked as a bartender that summer, and nosed around the television stations in San Francisco, San Jose, the Monterey television stations, looking for some way to catch on in a small market. I ended up getting on camera, doing television ads for some of these stations. They thought, oh, you look good on camera. I thought, well, that's very nice, but that's, again, sort of far afield.
Yeah.
So ended up getting the possibility of an internship at the Monterey TV station, which was a really wonderful little station. And they told me they would bring it to their board and they would get back to me. In the meantime, I decided to travel to Mexico, take the time just to get around. So I packed a little suitcase and I got on a plane and I flew to Puerto Vallarta. And I ended up hitchhiking through Mexico in 1976, if you could imagine.
Wow.
This was
without really planning that, without planning it ahead of time.
Oh, well, I was in Puerto Vallarta. I was going to be there for 2 weeks or thereabouts. I had a cousin who was in medical school in Guadalajara. I figured I'd go visit him. And halfway through the trip, I called the Monterey station, and they basically said they had their board meeting and they wouldn't be able to do anything until the end of the year. To which I thought, well, that's not going to happen. So I ended up traveling for 6 weeks in Mexico, hitchhiking. This is when the drug trade really was being monitored heavily by the military. There were checkpoints everywhere you went. And I traveled up and down. I went down to Oaxaca. I was down in Puerto Angel and Puerto Escondido, ended up in Acapulco, and then flew back to New York.
How was your Spanish?
My Spanish was really mediocre. I took French in college, my freshman year.
Oh, okay.
I had it all through high school. So Spanish was really non-existent. But I ended up back in New York City. So
well, let me ask you this. I want to before we get into the meat of your career, I wanted to ask you this feeling you had when you left Harvard, that, you know, I would just call it, generally speaking, you know, ambitious people go to Harvard. It's not everyone's ambitious, right? I had a similar conversation with Robert Kraft. It was like, you know, he was ambitious too. I was ambitious. Does that come before you get to Harvard, or does that come while you were at Harvard? Does that come when you see who you're surrounded with and how you stack up? What do you think?
I think you sort of develop that as you're growing up through high school. I think the idea that you think you should go to Harvard in the first place, that it's a place for you, says a lot about who you are, unless you're just a straight out academic, you know, with 1,600 board scores at the time, you know, and straight A's. If you were more well-rounded and involved in different things, I think that the ambition comes with the territory. You know, how overt it is, I think you develop that over time.
You know, Jeff Moley, my late, and Giles Whalen's late roommate. You and Giles were both lacrosse players, of course.
Oh, yeah.
He used to say, it teaches you to be a heavyweight. It doesn't mean you're going to be a heavyweight, but it's kind of some coursework behind the scenes on what it takes to sort of get ahead, I guess, in terms of ambition. So you were ambitious, and I think it's important, you know, to note that it didn't fall into your lap right away. So you went through some different experiences. You're back in New York, and what are you thinking at that point as you get back from Mexico? A couple things have fallen through. Nothing's really happened yet for you. So what are your expectations, and what's your process at that point?
Trying to get back into television and figure out what the path was. And I ended up scoring a job as the traffic desk assistant at WCBS News in New York, the newsroom, local news. It was quite an amazing group of people in this newsroom. They all went on to great things. John Tesh was a reporter. Geraldo Rivera was in the newsroom.
Wow.
Jim Jensen was the anchor. Marilyn Salinger. Ed
Jim
Joyce.
Jensen, a famous New York City anchor. What about my friend Dan Raviv? Was he there?
I did not know him. No.
Yeah, he became a lifelong CBS News radio guy. So you got your foot in the door. Tell people what traffic is in a radio station.
Traffic is that's the people who catch the film that comes in from all the stringers and from the
I mean
news team
television. Sorry. Yeah.
in television. And you basically take the film, log it in, put it on the board, take it into the lab, watch it. It gets processed. It comes out of the lab. It then gets to the editors and the newscaster or the
Yep.
news the anchor person, not the anchor, but the reporter who's going to do the on-air stuff. And you really have to sort of monitor the flow of the news as it's coming in from the field. Um, Very interesting job in the sense that my desk for 6 months in this job, so I sat next to the producer of the news. So
Uh-huh.
I was at his elbow, whether he liked it or not,
Yeah.
literally absorbing everything that went on all day long, from the vantage point of just sort of proximity.
You know,
And
you and I have known each other a long time. I never knew you were in the news business. I ended up starting 4 independent news agencies. You probably didn't know that either. Um, but how long were you in the news?
really 6 months. And
Uh-huh.
the reality was that, again, sort of your ambition gets the best of you. It's also your idealism. But I recognized very quickly that there was a huge process to rise in the newsroom. It would be years before you could ever
Yeah.
get a chance to, sort of succeed into anywhere near the producer position of the news. And here I am sitting for 6 months, absorbing it all, thinking to myself, this is going to be a dead end. So at that point, I figured out, well, where else can I go? Where else can I get background that relates to television programming, which was kind of where my head had been at. I was hoping to become Brandon Tartikoff at that
Hmm.
time. It
Who
was
was head of NBC programming eventually? Yep.
um, so I thought, okay, well, let's maybe nose around. So I ended up finding advertising as a way because advertisers were buying space on programs. I figured I should get this point of view in terms of how the business connects up because it clearly was a business, television.
Hmm.
So I ended up in the training program at McCann Erickson Agency, which is the
Oh,
Coca-Cola agency. Coca-Cola, Miller Lite, L'Oreal, lots of major accounts, major agency.
yeah.
And
Shades of Mad Men, right?
yeah, oh yeah. And I ended up exactly. That's exactly right. Um, uh, I ended up in this training program, which had started 6 months earlier, and I walked in, and there were probably 14 people in this training program, all relatively my age, out of college or a year or two. And it was interesting because, speaking of background, one of the summer jobs I had at Harvard was I was the advertising manager for Let's Go to Europe one summer.
Yeah.
Okay. And I had spent my entire 2.5 months running around to the major ad agencies in New York.
Mm.
And I had really, sort of absorbed a huge amount of media buying, how it worked, et
Hmm.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I get to McCann Erickson and I realize that I'm walking into a situation where these kids have 6 months and I know more than they do day one that I'm there, which really sort of raised some alarm. It's like, whoa, hello, what's going on? Did I just step into a bad situation again? But
Mm.
anyway, I worked my fanny off for 4 months there before I had the wonderful experience of getting fired.
Oh, really? What? Why were you fired?
I got fired because I was so ambitious that I didn't just step on toes there. I took a hammer to them.
Uh-huh.
And the guy who was running the training program, a guy named Frank Perkins, who was one of the four senior vice presidents, he had sort of a corner office. They all had corner offices, and they were all jockeying for position. Hugely competitive in advertising. And um, I had to go to my brother's wedding back in Santa Cruz in California. Before I left, the head of Interpublic personnel who had hired me into this program called me up and asked me to come in and talk to him, and he wanted to know how the training program was going. To which I had told him, I said, it's not that great. I said, I don't think that Mr. Perkins there has a clue as to what a training program should be. I said, because he's never around. We work for people there. I said, I basically drum up my own work. I said, I run around to the account executives and I sit with them and I find out what they do. And I asked them if there's anything I can help them with. And I said, I've been working around the clock doing sort of two jobs, this training program, which has about an hour of work a day. And I said, and the rest of my time I sort of freelance. Anyway, he asked me to write a critique of the program, to which I said, really? He said, yeah, I would really appreciate that. He said, this is not, I'm not liking what I hear. So I wrote him a critique of the program, and at the appendix part of it, I wrote a new program in terms of what the program, I thought, how it should work. And I went to California. The day I came back from California, I had a phone call from Mr. Perkins, who said, please come to my office as soon as you get in. And I had taken the red eye back from California.
Great.
So I walked into his office, and he told me, or his secretary said, by the way, when you're done with him, please come back and see me during lunch. I said, okay. I had a sneaking suspicion this wasn't going well. So he closed the door, and this guy turned so red in the face.
Could you speak up a little bit, Andy? I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
This guy got so red in the face as his door closed. I mean, he just worked himself up, and he looked at me and he said, I don't know who you think you are. He said, but you probably don't want to be here as much as I don't want you here. Honestly, that's a verbatim quote. Like, you can never forget something like that.
Yeah.
And, the guy said, look, he said, I don't know, what's going on. He said, but here's the deal. Okay, you no longer work here. I'm giving you 2 months of severance, and you can have an office as long as you need it until you find a new job. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting slap in the face.
Well, that's kind of generous, really, for a beginner.
No kidding. No kidding. For somebody who'd been there for 4 months.
Yeah, yeah.
So I said to him, I'm sorry to hear you say that. I said, but you're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I probably don't belong here. I said, at least the way the situation works. So I left. I then get a call from the head of media, who was a guy named Frank Deneen, who was a really renowned figure in the media landscape, media buying in New York advertising for McCann Erickson. He called me into his office, and he said to me, he said, I want to tell you something. He said, I'm sorry this happened to you. He said, but it's exactly what's wrong with this company. He said, because they're promoting you, not firing you.
Yeah.
And I said,
well, that was nice to hear.
Yeah, I said, that's lovely to hear. And he said, he said, look, he said, you did very well. He said, I should tell you, he said, that they took the training program away from Frank Perkins. And he said, they gave it to so-and-so, who was the head of the senior vice president in charge of Miller Lite, which is a real sort of slap in the face to Frank Perkins. And he said, and by the way, they said they've instituted your training program.
But you're not there anymore.
Exactly. And he said, let me give you a piece of advice. And it was probably one of the most salient pieces of advice I'd gotten to that point in time. He said, you need to learn the value of the word patience. He said, it's great to be ambitious. It's great to do what you've done. He said, but, you've got to learn that these situations are highly political. I said, well, that's pretty clear. I was a government.
Things take time. Yeah.
I said, but, patience is great. I said, it's wonderful, and I take your advice. I said, in this situation, I think patience was a waste of time.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry to say it. He said, look, he said, you're going to have a bright career. He said, just remember.
So it was a strange kind of affirmation. It reminds me a little bit. I got fired. So I go to New York to go online and online business, which doesn't exist in 1980. I get a job at a consulting firm. I bring the company's clients wanted to know how to go online. One of the things I did was I brought our company online. I literally got our stuff online, and I announced it at a client conference. And the next day, the guy from corporate headquarters called me in and said, and this is a quote, "I'm not going to fuck around with you, Conniff, you're fired." So it's just about the same time that happened to you. So I was embarrassed about it.
It's that Harvard education. That's what it is.
I was, we know better, right? So I was embarrassed about it for years, but eventually I put it on my resume, fired for going online in 1981. So you sound like you're in a similar situation. You're fired, but you did a good job getting yourself fired. But
Sure.
did that cost you any confidence, or were you still pretty confident and self-assured?
No, I think I recognized at that point that I needed to really sort of watch where I went next in terms of
Yeah.
corporations. Corporations really want to make you over in their image. They don't want your idealism. They don't want your aggression. They don't want your ambition necessarily at the stage that I was at in terms of my age.
Yeah.
So, I knew that I needed to find something that was smaller, more entrepreneurial in a way, that would respect my ability to want to get ahead.
Yeah.
Because that's really all it was. It was just not, I didn't want to waste my time.
Yeah.
That's not to say I didn't want to go through the steps that one had to go through. My overdrive was a lot higher than a lot of what people would really think was salient in
Yeah.
the situation. So,
It's not a direct analogy, Andy, but it does call to mind what makes Sammy run a little bit. That the hustle, the ambition.
well,
Um,
there's your segue because I became a talent agent.
okay. I knew that. I knew that. And how did you break into that business? Because I guess you kind of gave up on television at that point. I mean, television per se at that point, right?
No, not at all. I knew
No.
that
Okay.
I needed to find a new direction, okay, or a new venue, or business, if you will, that would add another layer. Because I sort of figured out how advertising worked vis-a-vis television. I had been in the news
True.
angle of it.
Yep.
So it just so happened that in the New York Times Magazine section, there was an article that was written about the television business and television programming. And I read that most of the television programmers and most of the people who were running the film business all had been talent agents. It all represented talent, from Diller to Eisner to Medavoy to, I mean, all these names that were out there, all had represented talent and then segued into TV movies at ABC or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
almost without exception. And I realized, oh, well, this could be an interesting venue, an interesting sort of path to take. So I started to nose around how to get into the entertainment business. And I had an interview. We had a family friend who was a gentleman named Morty Gottlieb. And Morty Gottlieb was a preeminent Broadway producer. He had produced Sleuth. He had produced Same Time Next Year.
Hmm.
He had grown up on the same street in Brooklyn, Carroll Street, as my father.
Wow.
And
I used to live by Carroll Street in Cobble Hill. Is that in Cobble Hill?
yep.
Yeah, I lived on Clinton Street, which was right next to Carroll
Yep.
Street, so I know that neighborhood quite well.
So I went and talked to Morton Gottlieb, and he was lovely. And I had casual acquaintance with him from before, earlier. It's not the first time I've met him. And he set me up with an interview with a friend of his who worked at a small talent agency, which is the J. Michael Bloom Agency.
Hmm.
Knew nothing about it. Went to have an interview, talked to Michael Bloom, had nothing going on, walked out, left, had a nice 2-hour conversation with him, told him what I was trying to do. And long story short, I stayed in touch. They had a receptionist who was really quite attractive, and I stayed in touch with her.
Nice.
While I was waiting for my meeting, we struck up a
Yeah.
conversation, and I just stayed in touch with her. And she called me up one day and said to me, Michael would like to talk to you again. So I went in and had an interview, and he hired me to be the assistant musical theater agent and the delivery boy in the agency. And
Uh-huh.
I was pounding the pavement at the time, really getting nowhere fast. And I thought, well, why not give it a try? I got nothing to do. So I went to work, and I got a desk in the small office area with all the other agents, and I sat there and learned about theater, mostly. And I started going to theater every night,
Oh,
and twice on Sunday to the matinee and the evening. And I spent an enormous amount of time in legwork learning who was acting in New York. And this was an actor's agency, purely an actor's agency. They had a
uh-huh.
commercials department and they had an acting department. They did film and television, but mostly theater. And I was, I was assisting the musical theater agent, and watching a lot of chorus boys come in and out of there, who would be talking to him but looking at me. And it
Hmm.
was really kind of odd, but it was interesting. And I really enjoyed going to theater. And
And
I
did you
noticed
find some people early in their trajectory as an at that
the
moment?
agency was known for handling young, developing talent. We were representing Tom Hanks. We were
Wow.
representing Sigourney Weaver. We were representing a guy named Michael Beck, who ended up being the lead in Warriors. This was all in the late 70s, 79 and 80, 78, 79, and 80. And we had a great little list of people. And I would, because I was seeing a lot of talent in New York every night, I started to really know the client list very well. So not only would I deliver the pictures and resumes to the casting directors, I would take them out of the envelope and I would talk to the casting director about the talent
Mm.
in person.
Yeah.
This is sort of my nature, and ended up
Yeah.
becoming very close with a lot of the casting people in New York City, by doing that. And within 6 months, um, one of the agents, the main agents in the office, left. And I just started picking up the telephone and talking to the casting directors and
Mm.
selling talent. And Michael Bloom came in and evaluated and said to me, "I can't believe it." He said, "It's 6 months. You're 6 months into this," and he said, I'm gonna let you replace the agent."
That's
Which
fantastic. So
uh, was,
so
it was a little strange, but I became a talent agent very quickly,
so you
representing.
weren't. That's funny. I sort of from afar, um, when I heard you were an agent, I was like, yeah, of course he is. That's a perfect fit for Andy. And I'm not even quite sure why I felt that way, but I knew you were ambitious. I knew you knew how to hustle, and it seemed like that would really be rewarded in that kind of job. Did it feel like a good fit to you, or did it feel awkward? Was it uncomfortable?
I loved it. It was great. I wasn't making very much money. The agency didn't have money to spend, but I had a full expense account. I had access to a car,
Hmm.
in the city, and I traveled up and down the East Coast to regional theater on a regular basis. I was up in New Haven at Yale. I was at Long Wharf.
Yep.
I would travel down to the Arena Stage in Washington, and any number of places, Paper Mill Theater in New Jersey. I would see everything that I possibly could, and was very into it. In the course of doing it, I got turned on to a play that was on in the repertory theater at Yale, and it was called the 1940s Radio Hour, and I fell in love with it. It was a musical on stage with a band on stage playing swing music, and it was
Hmm.
a live radio broadcast done, just before during World War II, sending out hits and songs, and it was really quite special. It was in the Yale Cabaret at the time, and ultimately moved on to the main stage. And I decided I wanted to represent the writer director of the play. And I went to Michael Bloom and I told him, "I saw this incredible thing." I said, "I really want to handle this." And he said to me, "We don't do that." To which I heard myself thinking to myself, "Well, I do on my spare time."
Right.
So I pursued it. And eventually, the writer director came and signed on with me. And I brokered the play at the Arena Stage in Washington so that it would move from the main stage at Yale down to the Arena Stage for a 3-month run, at the
Mhm.
Arena Stage, at which point it then attracted a lot of attention out of Broadway. And I had every producer in Broadway calling me up on the telephone, wanting to know, since I represented the play, um, how they could get their hands on it and whether they could move it to Broadway.
And
All
who
of a
was
sudden,
the writer? Who was the writer director, Andy?
his name is Walton Jones, and Walt Jones, and this was quite a wonderful piece of business.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I managed to put my first show on Broadway, and right out of the gate. I mean, as my only client as a literary agent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Michael Bloom, of course, was amazed, and I said to him, "I want to start a literary department,"
Yeah.
and he said, "Okay, go for it." So then
So
my second,
literary, so people know is essentially writers, right?
yeah,
Uh,
writers,
writers.
writers and directors or producers,
Right.
but primarily I was
Yeah.
concentrating on stage, with my eye on books and television and, and
Yeah.
things. It's a small community in New York, so word got out, and I started getting calls from certain writers and, wanting to meet, which gave rise to a literary department. And ultimately, I got a tip from one of our actors. Peter Michael Getz was his name, who said, "You should go up to Long Wharf." He said, "I'm up there this summer." He said, "There's a play up there you should take a look at." And I went up and saw a staged reading of a play called Agnes of God.
Oh yeah.
And I then pursued the playwright, a guy named John Peelmeyer, very talented guy who went on to write a bunch of TV movies. And um, anyway, he signed on as well. And I worked with him in revising the play, and it ended up going down to the Louisville Actors Studio and Actors Playhouse, whatever, in Louisville, where it won the Best Play contest down there, and came to Broadway.
Became a very
A movie,
successful play.
Norman Jewison directing and Jane Fonda starring.
Oh, who
So
was directing?
Norman Jewison directed the play.
Oh, no kidding.
The play was directed. I don't remember who the play was, but it was Elizabeth Ashley and Geraldine Page and Amanda Plummer on Broadway.
Pretty
Uh,
pretty good cast. Yeah.
Beautiful cast. It was hugely, hugely successful. And then
Yeah.
became a movie. At which point I started having eyes on California and Los Angeles because I had
Let me,
playwrights who couldn't make money in New York but wanted to write screenplays.
but let me ask you a question about this because this pertains to where you're going in your career. Ultimately, I think you were with Agnes of God. You said you got, you kind of got involved in the whole process, and you were maybe becoming what I would call a creative executive. At this point, maybe you wouldn't have called it that. You were an agent, but how involved were you? What did you do? I mean, what was your creative contribution to that process?
After it was interesting because I was really maybe out of line to some degree, but I suggested to the playwright that there were things that could be done from what I had seen on stage in the stage reading, that could enhance the play. So I actually gave him a set of notes on his play,
Mm-hmm.
which was very presumptuous, but John was young and his play was really, really fascinating and dramatic. And he was game.
Mm-hmm.
And he executed notes, at which point I was able to get him set up in Louisville, and ultimately led to having producers being interested in bringing it to Broadway.
That's a great
Um,
story.
and I remember, I mean, the Broadway poster, I still have it. He described, he said, "This is what you promised."
I'm sorry. Could you speak
And
up?
he said on the Broadway poster, "This is what you promised me,
Oh wow.
to get it to Broadway." And,
Yeah. Yeah.
it happened.
That's exciting. So you're
Yeah,
two for two.
it was pretty heady and pretty wonderful, especially because it was so successful. Where the 1940s radio hour experience ended up being something slightly different because I had every producer in Broadway chasing it. I gave it to who I thought were the new kids on the block and the hungriest producers in town, with the promise that because it was called the 1940s radio hour, that they had to shoot a television commercial. And they didn't. They reneged.
Uh-huh.
And the show ended up closing. As with box office rising, they closed the show after 4 months.
So nobody could sort of see it. Nobody could visualize it.
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
really, really a depressing situation because
Yeah.
I had very interesting people calling me up, people like William Goldman,
Yeah.
screenwriter extraordinaire in New York, calling me up and said that was the most remarkable experience I've ever seen on Broadway. He
Oh my
said,
gosh.
"What a unique thing." And he said, "I take my hat off to you." Um, Out of the blue,
Wow.
quite interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but those are experiences you just never forget. But that said, it's what ultimately led me to go to California because you couldn't make money at that time doing Broadway very
Okay.
easily. And
So,
interestingly
so
enough, it's interesting enough. I remember Michael Bloom, who invested in the show, the 1940s Radio Hour, had said to me he was very disappointed when it closed, and I don't know if I want to go down this road again. Blah 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 blah. Lo and behold, the show was a huge hit in stock theater,
oh,
traveling around the country, and ultimately paid back its investment through stock
wow.
theater and
Wow.
satellite production. So it's kind of interesting that happened. But by that time, I had decided to open an office, a literary department. After J. Michael Bloom opened in California, I moved out and opened a literary department in LA.
Still with Bloom in LA, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so what was the difference in doing what you did in movies and television compared to this amazing theater experience?
Well, I sort of became a creative to some degree, or at least a producing agent, if you will, because I did not want to sell development deals in LA. I wanted to sell scripts. And that was not something that was happening at the time. The spec script market had yet to be really established. But when I came to LA, I was bringing material with me that was fully formed screenplays. Whether they were ready for production, that was another thing, or whether they were saleable, but I was showing scripts. So it became a very easy segue, and I met a lot of people very quickly in LA. And I established myself to having really good taste and an ability to develop material. Within 2 years of moving to LA, I had gone back to New York. It's an interesting piece of business, but I'd gone back to New York, and a guy named Henry Gettle, who was the head of creative at 20th Century Fox Studios in New York City, married to Mary Rogers, Richard Rogers' wife,
Hmm.
daughter, excuse me, Richard Rogers' daughter, was a friend, and I used to go drag him to theater with me. We'd go up to Long Wharf in New Haven just to get out of town and see things. He called me up and said to me, "I have a writer you should consider meeting." And he said, "I read a screenplay of his." He said, "It's all over the place." He said, "But you might like it. And I want to turn you on to him." And he sent me a writer named James Monroe Justice, who had a very interesting piece of material called Nitty Gritty.
Hmm.
And Nitty Gritty, talk about full circle, Nitty Gritty was about the stringers who are on the street in New York City shooting and showing up at crime scenes and shooting video and taking them to the local news station and dropping them off to the traffic desk.
This
So I'm
resonated
reading
for
the
some
script and
reason.
I know exactly who these guys are.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I have lived, and this guy's living in Florida. Okay. And, he'd come out of the Florida writing program. But what was interesting about the script were these characters that he had created. They were as out there and unique, and his voice was unique. And the script was 165 pages long, all over the place. Typos, you name it, could not be presented anywhere. But I met him, and I said to him, "If you'll work with me," I said, "I will work with you in shaping the script." And we did it, and I had a script within 3 months in LA that was truly a calling card. The script was really interesting.
It got you indoors.
Huh?
Got you
Yeah.
into doors, through the
Not
door.
only got me indoors, but it got me an offer from Zoetrope Studios and Lucy Fisher, Harvard graduate, Lucy
Yeah.
Fisher, who was at that point working for Coppola at Zoetrope
Yeah.
Studios. And she
Yep.
said to me, "I want to buy the script." And I said, "That's great." She said, "I will get back to you about a deal." And the timing was such that Zoetrope had financial problems. And she called me up a couple months later and said, "I can't buy the script. We
Yeah.
can't, we don't have the money to make it happen." She said, "But I will do whatever I can to help you." with this. Um, I said, well, that's really too bad. Anyway, the writer came back. I submitted it a handful of places. I got a lot of positive stuff, but no takers. To which I then said to the writer, who showed up on my doorstep in California, um, just to get sent around to meet people. And I said to him, we need to revise the script. I said, it's still a little long, it still has some issues. I spent 48 hours, night and day, with the writer. Okay, he wrote, I typed. I corrected in the typewriter. I revised in the typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out with the script, and within a week I had a 3-studio bid on the script,
Mm.
which was quite fascinating.
Yeah,
Uh,
so that's happy too. Yeah.
and I ended up taking the best offer I possibly could. And the writer, in meeting with this was at CBS Films, talk about full circle again. Here I am
Yeah.
coming at CBS News at the beginning, CBS Films. I sold him the script, and the writer said, the head of the studio said to him, how did this come about? And he said, well, my agent developed it with me. And they called me up and said, you deserve to produce the script. And I
Hmm.
said, say what? They made a deal with me to produce the script, and then 2 weeks later they called up and said, this is a guy named Joe Wazan, called up and said, I want to work with you now. Can I hire you? And I said, make me an offer. So he
Yeah.
ended up, long story short, it took me a number of months to extract myself out of being an agent. I didn't want
Yeah.
to leave my clients high and dry at that point. I had other clients, and I didn't want to leave the agency high and dry. So I ended up hiring my replacement at the agency, and ultimately went to work as a development executive at CBS Films. And that got me out of talent agency and into the whole notion of script development and producing in
Yeah.
Hollywood.
So you
That's
you really weren't an agent for very long. I didn't realize that. I thought there was like a long slog there, but it sounds like it was only a few years. Is that right?
I became an agent in 78, I guess 78, and I left in 81. So three and a
Yeah,
half,
pretty
three and a half years.
pretty pretty
Yeah.
quick. So okay. So at this point, you're a film agent, and pardon me, you're a film producer. And were there any things that you produced that you're particularly proud of? I'm sure there were.
Well, unfortunately, in Hollywood, what you learn very quickly is that, I didn't become a film producer as a development executive first for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I signed a 2-year deal with CBS Films. 4 months, lots of nuance in this story that's quite fascinating. I show up at CBS Films for my first day, and I'm told that the script that I have sold them, of which I'm essentially the producer of, but no longer because I'm now the development executive on the project. Okay. I'm informed by Joe Wazan that the director, he's hired a director for the project. Never asked the producer, didn't tell me until I showed up, and I'm told that Michael Cimino had been hired to be the director on the project.
Okay, so tell everyone who doesn't know what Michael Cimino is famous for.
Michael Cimino had directed Heaven's Gate, and
Yeah.
which was a very interesting movie. But before that, he had directed Deer Hunter, and
Yes, but
Deer
Heaven's
Hunter
Gate,
was,
Deer Hunter I thought was terrific, but Heaven's Gate is considered one of the biggest bombs of all time.
yes, and it
So
also
it's,
bankrupted United Artists.
yeah.
So here we have CBS Films, a division of a blue chip company with FCC licenses, okay, and a maverick ex-agent head of the studio hiring Michael Cimino, which did not sit very well on any level.
I had assumed that he was unhirable at that moment. I guess he wasn't.
He was hireable by Joe Wazan, who had worked with him on Johnson County Wars, which
Okay.
became eight. So now the other thing is that Nitty Gritty, which is the script that I had sold to the company, was actually a dark comedy. It was really edgy and funny.
Yeah.
And Michael Cimino, not a funny guy at all.
That's a
No.
problem.
And I remember Joe said to me, "Did you ever see Thunderbolt and Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood?" And I said, "I don't remember it being a comedy." And he said,
That's
"Oh,
funny.
it was
Andy,
terrific talent, terrific talent."
I want to make sure we've got a lot of ground to cover here, and not as much time as I'd like. But so when we met, you had obviously been producing for a while, and tell the story of, or I'm very curious about how you came to be at the top of Sony IMAX, which is an interesting combination of technology and filmmaking.
Yeah, I had, in the course of doing things, got a studio deal at 20th Century Fox, had my own shingle there for a few years. They changed administrations. I ended up being thrown out with my projects with the bathwater, which is what happens in Hollywood when they change horses in midstream. They clear the decks. They don't want anything to do with the previous administration. I ended up out on the street as a producer with no portfolio. I had an executive producer credit to my name. I did a movie called Grandview USA, which I had set up at CBS Films and ended up executive producing in my transition to become a producer at Fox with a studio deal. That deal ends. I'm out on the street, and I go to work for a company called Cinema Group, which had actually done a destination film on the Grand Canyon and built the Grand Canyon IMAX theater.
Hmm.
No knowledge of IMAX at that point, really didn't know anything about it, but now I find myself working for this company on a sort of part-time basis, being their head of production, overseeing an IMAX film on Niagara Falls, which is their second venture. They're building a theater in Niagara Falls. So
Wow.
that was my introduction to IMAX. The job ends up going away. I end up working as a producer on a script. Oh, I started writing. That became something else. I wrote a script which I sold to Dino De Laurentiis and had a deal at the same time there as the producer-writer of a project called Cops R Us. At the same time as I'm consulting at Cinema Group on this IMAX film. As I'm leaving the Cinema Group situation, the head of the company says to me, our next project and our next destination is going to be Hawaii. Will you write a concept for a Hawaii film so I can raise money on it? So I went and did some research on Hawaii. I wrote up a treatment for him. I left. 2 years later, I get a call. We're making the Hawaii IMAX film. You're the producer and the writer. You go, whoa, how about that? There's
Yeah.
honor. There's honor amongst thieves somewhere along the way. I can't believe this
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
back again. And lo and behold, I'm now working as a consultant for a music management company, which has offices in the Coralco building on Sunset Boulevard. And I'm running around trying to land Tony Scott as a director for a project and for this company. I'm now going to go to Hawaii and make an IMAX film. So I'm told to break the mold in the IMAX world. Okay, don't do a documentary, a straight documentary. Let's do something different. So I did something different. I went and hired Carol Ballard to direct the film, to work with me, and I started writing the script. I took him on location in Hawaii. We drove around for a week in a car. Carol Ballard had done Black Stallion for people who
Yeah.
are interested, and eventually would do Fly Away Home for a
Hmm.
TriStar. And anyway, it was very difficult working with Carol. He was not an easy guy to deal with. I wrote this script. Carol Ballard went on to do this film at TriStar, left the project. I'm left holding the bag with the script. Anyway, the film's going to get made, and Carol Ballard had hired an assistant director at that time, a guy out of San Francisco named Bob Hillman, who, lo and behold, gets brought onto the project, and I have to sort of deal with this as well. But anyway, I went to Hawaii and produced
New
an IMAX.
director. Yeah.
So coming back from Hawaii, having now being one of the only people in Hollywood who's actually done an IMAX film, because IMAX is out of Toronto, Canada, and most of the people are in that company, though it's now been bought by
Mhm.
financiers out of New York who are running the company. They come to me and, well, long story short, I end up going to work for Sony that builds an IMAX theater in New York City and wants to make a New York-based destination film in IMAX for the studios, essentially. Columbia, TriStar. Peter Guber
Yeah.
is president of Sony Pictures, and he's bought the furniture. He's bought a director in 3D, he's bought equipment, and he doesn't know anything about IMAX. And
The
lo and
famous
behold,
moment at Sony with him and John Peters, as there have been books written about it. A lot of money was lost in those days.
And the New York IMAX film is actually written about in that one of those books,
Is
because
that right?
yeah, they were very fascinated with this process and what this was, and I had to develop a script um, to be a New York IMAX film, and it had to be not a documentary, but a drama, because it was going to be produced at Columbia Pictures,
Yeah.
and it was going to be distributed by Sony Pictures Classics, and it was a quite an interesting process. But I ended up working with a gentleman named Stephen Lowe, who was the preeminent IMAX 3D director at the time,
Hmm.
and having a very hard time getting the script off the ground because he only wanted to do a documentary. And I kept saying to him, this project isn't going to get made unless it's got a drama element to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as the project is about to fall apart, I come home on a weekend and I sit down and I am struck by lightning and I write a treatment, an 8-page treatment for the New York IMAX film called Across the Sea of Time.
Hmm.
And I'm very excited. I mean, I was actually, I moved myself in writing the treatment. I was weeping at the end of the treatment. It was like one of those moments where it was like, it was an emotional story, truly
Yeah.
emotional story.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm told that unless I come up with a solution, I said, well, here's the solution. I send the treatment to everybody at Columbia TriStar, the whole board of the, I end up in this big board meeting, or the big roundtable meeting, and present this thing to them, and they say, go for it. They loved it.
Wow.
I had to convince the director to stay on board with it, which I finally did. It became a very circuitous thing. Long story short, the film got made.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
it got at the IMAX annual convention. It got a standing ovation because it was
Oh, good
truly,
for you.
it was the first dramatic film, really dramatic film done in IMAX. It
Yeah.
was 50
Well, you're
minutes
on the
long.
cutting edge, and now I know, Andy, you're with a company called Magnetic 3D as I believe the COO. Is that right?
Correct.
And you are still pioneering display technology, right?
Well,
But
the holy grail of having done all this 3D at IMAX, the holy grail was glasses-free 3D.
yeah,
And my connection to this company, Magnetic 3D, came about because they do glasses-free 3D displays.
yeah,
And it is now at the point where we've taken it to state of the art for what it is in lenticular 3D. You don't need glasses. It's a multi-viewer display, and we're selling into theme parks and hospitality, healthcare, lots of different things. It's
that's
been an
great.
interesting segue.
Andy, we just have a minute. I do want to mention also that through all this, you've been married to an extremely talented artist with a reputation and a career all her own. Tell us about Yvette.
Yvette is remarkable. Yvette has really sort of become the star of the family in many respects, though we have two children who are in their 30s now, Alec and Elise. But Yvette is just made fixed term at Pepperdine University. She's an assistant professor of art. She teaches
That's great.
in the program, the art program there, as well as those who are sort of dealing with their humanities requirements. She teaches a lot of non-artists how to paint and to draw and make
Yeah.
prints. She's a remarkable talent. She has a studio of her own and a flourishing art career, and she's about to have a mid-career survey at the Oceanside Museum starting in November.
And what's her last name, Andy?
Yvette Gellis.
Oh, it is. Okay, good for you. You put this. You got your name on some good art. That's pretty good. That was clever. That's good
It's,
agenting.
she's a
But
remarkable
listen, Andy,
talent.
we have to. Forgive me. We got to sign off. But this has been great. I feel like we're just getting started. There may have to be a part two to this because we have so much more to talk about. But I was really glad to hear all of that, and I want to thank you for doing this. And as I like to say, see you at the reunion.
That'll be great. I'll look forward to it. But let me just add one tag to this, which is Michael Conniff is a wonderful writer, and
Ah,
my relationship, okay, has flourished with you through the years because I've been privileged to read an enormous amount of your material and work with you actually as a screenwriter.
Yeah, yeah, and
I'm
helped me a lot, actually.
extremely grateful for our friendship.
Thank
So,
you. Me too, Andy. And you've always been a tremendous help. And the great thing about you is you never bullshit me. Like if you don't like, you always give it to me straight. And any real writer will tell you that's very hard to find. It's very hard to find somebody who's going to tell you what they really think, not just about, oh, I love this or, whatever. But you really need somebody like you, a professional, who can say, yeah, you're missing this and, this could be better. And so thank you for all of that. And most of all, thank you for your friendship. That's been the best part.
likewise. And thank you for this. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Andy. See you at the reunion. Bye bye.
You bet. Bye bye.